everybody, it's Richard and I'm back for another video.
Oh yeah, it's another video, alright, about
Death metal.
Kinda. I mean, yeah, basically death metal. I don't know, this band's a little hard to describe. It's a band that probably a whole lot of people have heard the name of, and I'm willing to bet that a smaller number of you have actually listened to them before. Because this week, we are going to be talking about Nunslaughter? Wait, it's Nunslaughter. Yeah, Nunslaughter. That makes a lot more sense, given what they sound like and all that. But yeah, this is a band that I'm willing to bet most people who are into this corner of metal have probably heard of, and then a smaller fraction of them probably have, at least listened to them once or twice. But there's a reason that they are like so well known with the spooky, scary name, but not that many people have actually listened to them. And I believe my own personal story of how I became aware of Nunslaughter might demonstrate why that is. So picture this. We're way back in time. It's little Babby Jub. He's just moved out of his parents' house. He's going off to college, and he now has obtained a checking account. Luckily, back then, I had my priorities straight, so having access to an entire new world of online commerce, the first thing I did was go out and try to find physical copies of all these wacky, obscure metal albums I'd been listening to in MP3 form in high school. And of course, that meant starting with my most coveted album at the time, the first Have a Hedge album. Because, what red-blooded American little feller doesn't want to get down with some of these wholesome jams?
I vomit on God's child.
I mean, that's family fun with a capital F. F first. But, this was like little kid job. I didn't know where to fucking buy that. So I do a little bit of the old Googling, and I come across this website called Hell's Headbangers, who most of you are probably aware of. That's like one of the premier metal labels in the world. And they had it for sale, so I bought that and a compilation of Profanatica demos. And I still own both of them today. Look forward to an episode on those guys eventually. But when that stuff comes in the mail, it's got a little promo flyer, and all over it, it says Nunslaughter. And I'm like, what the hell is a Nunslaughter? So I go on Metal Farchives and look them up. Once I get the page open, I'm like,
What the fuck is that?
these guys have like 200 releases. What am I supposed to do with that? And so I didn't look into them for a while until later on somebody convinced me to buy their albums, their full-length albums. See, these guys are kind of a lot like Sabbath from Japan, not the English one. They have like 1 billion live albums. They got 1 billion splits with other bands, all these like 7-inch singles. And it can be intimidating, at least it was for me, but they honestly are a very important band. And the best way to get into them is just to listen to the proper full-length albums, of which there aren't like that many. It'll be fine. It'll be okay. It worked out fine for me. They're also like Sabbath in that they are super fucking old and are actually super fucking historically relevant, because Japan, Sabbath, that's pretty early black metal stuff. They had 3 full-length albums out by the time the first Burzum rolled around, alright? And Nunslaughter, if you go back far enough, technically one of the earliest death metal bands from the United States. Sort of. When I say sort of, I don't mean that they're not one of the earliest death metal bands. I mean, death metal is just sort of a label that kind of applies to what Nunslaughter does, but it doesn't really encompass all of it, because one, they're coming from an era when death metal was still being formulated, so there's a lot of stuff in here that isn't straight up, like death metal in the modern sense of the term. And 2, they actually called their style devil metal, which honestly does kind of fit them. That's another similarity they have with Sabbath, who always called their style blacking metal.
Don't be Peter gazing.
I don't know, it's Japan. They don't speak any English that well. But what the fuck is devil metal? To find out, you're gonna have to go back to the demos, back to 1986, 1987. I told you this shit was old school. Alright, so you can already tell this is sort of a weird meeting point between early death metal, early grindcore, thrash metal, black metal, all kinds of stuff. It's devil metal. And it's also very raw. And it sounds like it's from fucking South America, dude. Which is why they saw fit to re-record that song for their first full length when they finally got around to putting one out in the year 2000. That intro also shows off another important aspect of their sound, which is that this band has always had a sense of humor, much like Macabre, another early death metal band. And they're big on these sort of full stop type things, like this one coming up right here. I am death. A very effective mode of building tension right before they launch into a very chaotic fast part. Like this. And this is what devil metal vocals sound like. They're not quite straight up like your normal sort of death metal vocal. Dawn of the Dead, and yes, that is the vocalist's name. He was given that by King Fowley. It's thrashy. It's still brutal, but it's very understandable. I like it. There's also a lot of black metal, like I said. This right here, that's almost like somebody playing a Bathory riff in a grindcore style, and I find that to be very interesting. Speaking of grindcore, there's plenty of very fast, exceptionally chaotic grindcore black metal type shit going on in the 80s demos. This right here, this is like 87, and it's about as extreme as Beherit and Sarcophago, if not more so. Luckily for our ears, they saw fit to record this one on the full length as well. And again, the cleaner production not only brings out the songwriting nuances, but in this case, honestly, it's more extreme because you can hear exactly how fast they are going. Really good, like grind, thrash, death, black. I don't know, it's devil metal. And it kicks ass. But yeah, this is very much sort of their own unique style of death metal that also has elements of a whole lot of other stuff. At times it even gets kind of close to like horror punk. There's a whole lot of shit going on. And it makes sense that the first Nunslaughter album would be great. There's a saying that you have your whole life to record your first album. And these guys definitely took advantage of that because they started in the mid-80s and you get a first album out to like 99, 2000. The second album is the make or break one. And honestly, all the albums after that too. Luckily for us, Nunslaughter kept the quality consistently high and kind of kept with their whole general philosophy of doing metal their own kind of weird way. Speaking of horror punk, check out this song on their second album. It doesn't start out very horror punk-ish. In fact, this riff kind of reminds me of something you hear on an Incantation album. But then the transition happens and it gets super fucking punky in a very unique and interesting way, utilizing negative space again with this crazy fucking polka beat. You can see why these guys are a huge live band. This song must be a blast live. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to see Nunslaughter yet. Maybe someday. You know, for such short and punk influenced songs, they got a lot of different sections. Trade-off vocals here are nice too. And here comes the humor again.
Where you going, sister?
It's good stuff, man. So yeah, Nunslaughter, A+++ band. Get all their albums if you can. And as I mentioned earlier, they have a lot in common with Sabbath in both good and bad ways. If you know anything about Sabbath, you know that they were a band that almost didn't happen because of a pretty major death in the main songwriter's family, Gezal, way back in the 80s. They actually broke up after their demos until he managed to kind of pull things back together. Similarly, in the case of Nunslaughter, Dawn of the Dead is kind of like the main guy, but they had a drummer named Jim Sadist for years. You heard him on all those songs I just played. Well, at least the album ones. He actually wasn't around in the 80s, but he's the closest thing to like an original member they got outside of Don. But he passed away in 2015, and that put the band's status in turmoil as well. But luckily, they managed to come back from that. But a cool thing that they have in common with Sabbath is that they are very connected to a whole web of other bands. Not only do they do splits with lots of people, but they show up as guests on a lot of albums. A lot of members of Nunslaughter, both past and present, have even been like heavily involved in other bands. A good example would be Dawn of the Dead doing vocals on the first Graveworm album. And we're talking about Graveworm from the US, not that silly goth band from Italy. Oh, come on, am I really offending anybody with that? Listen, I know they're paisans, but Graveworm from the US is way better than the Italian band. Because these guys play very old school style black metal that kind of like Nunslaughter has a decent amount of punk and like 80s thrash to it. It's interesting hearing Don doing vocals here because he's a lot more subdued to sort of fit the more monochromatic style of Graveworm compared to the really wacky shit he does in Nunslaughter. Now, you know, he's fitting the style and he does a darn good job. The other Graveworm albums, after the first one, actually kind of get better than this one. But I do like this one a little bit, just for the novelty factor of having Dawn of the Dead on vocals. Then it gives you a good idea of what you're going to hear on any given Graveworm album. It's going to be Bathory-ish, it's going to be Hellhammer-ish, It's going to be very minimalist, very nasty, and very misanthropic. And also very much unlike any of the Scandinavian black metal out there.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
But my favorite sort of Nunslaughter adjacent band has to be the main project of the guy that played guitar on their fourth album, a guy named Zach. He hooked up with Disgustin' Justin from Varg Timon and Weaponizer to start off a very Nunslaughter-esque kind of death punk band called Necrofilth, who are very much Nunslaughter-esque in their focus on these kind of thrashing grooves and on music that works really well in a live setting. Utilizes a lot of the same sort of expectation-based songwriting. Really nice bass tone on all of their albums. And the vocals are very understandable and decidedly not standard death metal, while simultaneously being very death metal and how brutal they are. These guys are a little bit less hard on the Satan and a little bit more about fucking corpses and stuff. So maybe they're a little bit more death metal where Nunslaughter were more black metal. I like them both. And I really love their lyrics. They're just silly. You know, it's fun. It's also disgusting. And it's not something you want to play for your
elderly 92-year-old granny.
But they have more in common with Nunslaughter and just aesthetics. If you remember back to when I was playing that Nunslaughter song, I was talking about how they would utilize full stops to jump into really chaotic fast sections.
Let me show you something.
On this song, Necrofilth kind of does the reverse, where they start out super fast and chaotic and crazy, and you can't really tell where it's going. Then there's a full stop, and you get to, you know, a slightly less chaotic riff. It feels like they're kind of ironing things out each time they stop the music. And then when you get to the real big full stop, that's when the groove really kicks in. So these guys clearly studied at the altar of Nunslaughter when they were writing this kind of stuff. And I'm glad they did, because this is a great fucking song. They got plenty of very like horror punkish style stuff too. Such as on this live favorite, Worm Skull. Like, this is straight up, I don't know, if the Misfits played death metal, it would sound like this. And I feel like the guys in Necrofilth would take that as a compliment. There's also kind of a weird psychedelic element to all of it that isn't really present in Nunslaughter. Big, nasty grooves, all that kind of good stuff. But, you know, I feel like we've been playing a lot of Necrofilth. We should end on a Nunslaughter song.
아, 이거는 못 고르지.
That is a very good point. There is one element to the Nunslaughter Sonic Gumbo that we have been neglecting, and that is good old-fashioned, old-school heavy metal. Let's rectify that. Here's a song entitled The Sephiroth off of their second album, Goat. And at its core, this is very much sort of an old-school heavy metal song, almost like a death metal Manowar, with that powerful groove and backbeat, the drums. Also plenty of Celtic Frost too, with those dissonant kind of chord combinations. But yeah, that's kind of why Nunslaughter sticks out to me. They're not just a band that has a bajillion different splits and singles and shit. They're an authentic, amazing, very unique sounding death metal band that has very much their own style, and it never gets boring because they do so much wacky shit with it. And obviously, this would be great live. Again, I haven't gotten to see them yet. They were going to play here once at a complete fucking hole in the wall, like somebody's garage, and people drove over from like multiple adjacent states, and so many showed up that the cops showed up, and turned out the place didn't have a liquor license. And that was the end of me getting to see Nunslaughter that time. But I still got all their albums, and they're all really good. And you should go out and listen to them yourself. Hopefully I convinced you to. See you around next time. Thanks for watching, listening, whatever the fuck.
I'll get you for this, you monster faggot!
I'm not really contributing jack shit to society, just my opinion.